Carolina. Got to the auditorium. Now, this is with the classic five, David, Eddie, Paul, Melvin, and myself. When we got to the auditorium, there was a rope right down the center of the auditorium.
A rope.
A rope. I truly miss Paul. Paul was one of a kind. You know, I could always depend on him. He was solid as a rock. And he stood by me when we were going through some turbulent times, personnel-wise.
At 83, this last surviving member is finally sharing the hard truth about what the group went through. What happened to the Temptations over the years? This legendary music group gave us some of the greatest soul and Motown hits, but now only one member is left.
It's just not the same. Ooh, baby, I'm losing you.
How did they reach such success, only to face struggles along the way? Why are so many of the original members gone? This video reveals the secrets that only one man is now left to tell.
The Temptations could have come from central casting. You had 5 great-looking, 6-foot or more singers.
No talk about classic Motown music is complete without mentioning the Temptations. This legendary group, formed in the early 1960s, came from 2 earlier groups, The Distance and The Primes. Together, they became a musical powerhouse in R&B and soul, known for their smooth voices and exciting dance moves.
They dressed better than anybody else. They danced better than anybody else. They sung better than anybody else. So there you have it, the Temptations.
Now, Eddie Kendricks and Paul Williams first started singing in their local church, where they found they had a real talent for music. By the time they were teenagers, Eddie and Paul decided to try forming their own singing group. They teamed up with 2 other friends to form a group they called the Cavaliers. They later met Milton Jenkins, who saw potential in them. He became their manager and helped the group change their name to the Primes. Around the same time, another teenager named Otis Williams had started his own singing group called Otis Williams and the Siberians. By 1960, though, things changed for the Primes, and the Primes disbanded. Eddie called Otis Williams, who now needed more singers for his new group. Otis was trying to form a group that could audition for a record label run by Berry Gordy, the founder of Motown Records. Otis offered Eddie a spot in the group, but Eddie had one condition. He wanted Paul to join too. Otis agreed, and Eddie and Paul moved back to Detroit to join Otis's group.
Berry told me, he said, I want you to work with the Temptations and try to get some hits on them. I was the first producer at Motown to start to work with them.
This new group included Otis Williams, Eddie Kendricks, Paul Williams, Melvin Franklin, and Al Bryant. They decided to call themselves the Elgins and began rehearsing for their Motown audition. Berry Gordy was impressed with their sound and decided to sign them. The group tried different names briefly, even recording as the Pirates for a short time. However, they eventually settled on the Temptations and began working on their unique sound. In the beginning, Eddie and Paul shared lead vocals, while other members also sang lead on different songs. They were also lucky to get help from Smokey Robinson, a talented writer and producer. Smokey wrote a song for them called I Want a Love I Can See, led by Paul. Although it didn't become a big hit, fans loved hearing Paul sing it live.
I want a love I can see. That's the only kind that moves a thing.
Still, the Temptations struggled to find that big hit and were sometimes jokingly called the Hitless Temptations. Around this time, a young singer named David Ruffin began showing interest in joining the group. He often followed them to performances, hoping to get a chance. David eventually got to sing with the Temptations on stage one night, impressing them with his voice and energy. He seemed like the perfect fit.
What's wrong with you? Come on.
Meanwhile, Al Bryant, one of the original members, was getting frustrated with their slow progress. He started missing practices and even got into arguments with the group. Trouble was that on top of the drinking, Al developed a bad attitude, Otis Williams explained in the book Temptations, noting that Bryant began acting out as the group's profile continued to grow. In one incident, Bryant attacked Paul Williams with a beer bottle during an argument, but somehow remained with the group, with Paul convincing the others not to sack their increasingly troubled bandmate. But when Bryant caused yet another stir at Motown's 1963 Christmas party, the other Temptations decided enough was enough. He was fired. As Otis Williams related later on in Temptations, The group encountered Bryant 5 years later, following a show at Detroit's Cobo Hall, and he was in quite a disheveled state. His hair had grown long and unruly, and there were big dark circles around his eyes, and the veteran singer wrote. His skin was the color of ash. Otis also remembered detecting a deep sadness in Bryant's words when they spoke backstage on that day. Bryant was only 36 years old when he died of cirrhosis of the liver on October 26, 1975 in Florida.
Me and Melvin used to pack records for Anna Records. My first record was on Vigo Records with Tommy Smalls, used to be a disc jockey in New York, and Willie Stork, and on the Stork Club in New York. And I was 16 then. That's when I used to have to walk Melvin Franklin home.
After letting Bryant go, there was an opening. That's when they brought in David Ruffin as his replacement. With David in the lineup, the Temptations finally found the magic they had been missing. They were ready to become one of Motown's most successful groups. Smokey Robinson saw something special in David Ruffin's voice. Ruffin had a mellow but strong style that stood out, and Robinson thought he could create a hit song for him. Later that year, while on tour, Robinson and his friend Ronnie White wrote My Girl. They had Ruffin sing lead, and My Girl reached #1 on the pop charts, becoming the Temptations' first big hit and their most famous song to this day. Following My Girl, Ruffin continued to lead on several songs. Out of all the members of the Temptations, David probably had the roughest childhood. The would-be soul legend lost his mother at a very early age and grew up in poverty. His father, Eli Ruffin, was reportedly an abusive man who made David and his siblings perform at churches as a singing group, and while his older siblings allegedly suffered physical abuse at the hands of the family patriarch. Norman Whitfield took a turn with the group. He had a new idea, a more upbeat, funky sound. Whitfield's song Ain't Too Proud to Beg was next, and it became a huge hit, making Whitfield the group's main producer.
My question is to Otis. Why was David Ruffin fired from the Temptations?
However, as the group progressed, challenges emerged with Ruffin, notably his developing cocaine addiction, leading to missed rehearsals and performances, which became a source of concern for the group. It is believed that Ruffin's drug misuse started at some point in the 60s, though it was only in the later part of the decade when it truly became a problem. He was getting so high, the man was a walking skeleton. Ruffin's friend Linster, Butch Merle, told a source, looking back on the singer's later years and how he had yet to kick his drug habit. With this success, Ruffin had begun demanding special treatment as lead singer, riding to and from gigs in a private mink line limousine with his then-girlfriend Motown singer Tammy Terrell, instead of the group limousine used by the other 4 Temptations. The other members slowly became irritated and annoyed with Ruffin's behavior. Following Motown's decision to rechristen the Supremes as Diana Ross and the Supremes, and Martha and the Vandellas as Martha Reeves and the Vandellas, Ruffin felt entitled to the same treatment and demanded that his group be renamed as well, to David Ruffin and the Temptations.
Well, you see, when we first started out, we made a vow that we would not change, because we had heard about Frankie Lyman leaving the Teenagers and Tony Williams leaving the Platters, so we made a vow.
Ruffin was also causing friction with Berry Gordy by demanding an accounting of the group's earnings. Motown partially acquiesced by allowing the Temptations to retain an outside accounting firm, but the firm did not have full access to the books from the Temptations' manager, International Talent Management, Inc., a subsidiary of Motown. Some of this behavior was attributed to the fact that by this time Ruffin had begun using cocaine regularly, building further tension within the group, and causing him to miss a number of group meetings, rehearsals, and concerts. There was a consensus among the rest of the group that Ruffin needed to be replaced.
And when you are a group, you have to move and think as one unit. You cannot have 5 guys going, 5 different directions.
When Ruffin missed an engagement at a Cleveland supper club in order to attend a show by his new girlfriend, Barbara Gale Martin, the group decided that he had crossed the line. The other 4 Temptations drew up legal documentation, officially firing Ruffin. The next day, Dennis Edwards was hired to take Ruffin's place. Edwards and Ruffin were good friends, and at first Ruffin accepted his dismissal and encouraged Edwards. However, at Edwards' official debut with the Temptations, Ruffin came to the show and jumped on stage, taking the microphone from Edwards, singing lead on Ain't Too Proud to Beg, and disappearing as quickly as he had appeared. Ruffin repeated this stunt several times throughout the group's tour run. Despite the group hiring extra security to keep Ruffin out, he continued to find ways to sneak into the venue and jump on stage when the group performed one of the songs he had once sung lead on. After leaving Motown, Ruffin signed with Warner Brothers Records and released 2 albums, So Soon We Change and Gentleman Ruffin. Later on, he joined forces with his old friend Eddie Kendricks, who was also from the Temptations. David Ruffin tragically passed away on June 1, 1991, due to an accidental overdose of crack cocaine. The incident occurred after Ruffin reportedly collapsed at a crack house in West Philadelphia, accompanied by his friend Donald Brown.
Alcohol and all types of drugs were just a part of the David Ruffin lifestyle.
In the band biography Temptations, Otis Williams wrote about the last time he saw Ruffin alive, which was at a Las Vegas concert just a few months before his death. David came backstage to see us after the show, and while I had known David as a drug user since the late 1960s, I didn't recall ever seeing him look so bad, Williams remembered. The drugs left him looking sunken and emaciated. Williams would later explain that he knew right then and there that Ruffin's days were most likely numbered, given his poor physical shape at the time he was catching up with his former bandmate.
And when you are a group, you have to move and think as one unit. You cannot have 5 guys going, 5 different directions.
During their earlier days as a group, Paul Williams was the only member of the Temptations who abstained from alcohol consumption. He would, in fact, lecture his bandmates about ruining their health whenever he'd catch them covertly drinking. That's why it's tragically ironic that Williams descended into alcoholism as the Temps began to enjoy massive success as one of Motown's most popular acts. According to Otis Williams in Temptations, Paul's drinking problem might have started when he entered an affair with a woman named Winnie Brown, who worked as the Supreme's hairstylist. Paul had married young and had 5 children, Otis wrote. He was devoted to his family but torn between them and Winnie. Before too long, Paul, who never took anything stronger than milk, started drinking. It was difficult watching his bandmate develop a drinking problem almost out of nowhere. To see a guy come from drinking milk to drinking, sometimes 2 to 3/5 of Courvoisier a day, that was kind of hard to take, he said.
I truly miss Paul. Paul was one of a kind. I could always depend on him. He was solid as a rock, and he stood by me when we were going through some turbulent times, personnel-wise.
Williams and Brown opened the Celebrity House West, a celebrity fashion boutique in downtown Detroit. The business was not as successful as planned, and Williams soon found himself owing more than $80,000 in taxes. His health had deteriorated to the point that he would sometimes be unable to perform, suffering from combinations of exhaustion and pain, which he combated with heavy drinking. Each of the other 4 Temptations did what they could to help Williams, alternating between raiding and draining his alcohol stashes, personal interventions, and keeping oxygen tanks backstage. Ultimately, Williams's health, as well as the quality of his performances, continued to decline, and he refused to see a doctor. Williams was found dead inside a car parked in an alley, having just left the new house of his then-girlfriend after an argument. A gun was found near his body. His death was ruled an apparent suicide. According to Otis Williams, Paul had expressed suicidal thoughts to him and Melvin Franklin months before his death. Not everyone believed that Paul Williams's death was a suicide, however. Unexplained circumstances surrounding his death caused his family to suspect some kind of foul play, though nothing was ever remotely proven. The 3 issues are laid out. First, Williams was shot on the left side of his head, but his gun was found in his right hand. In order to have shot himself, Williams would have had to angle his gun in an impractical manner. Second, a bottle found by his left had shattered, as if he had dropped it. Third, the gun had been fired twice, but only 1 bullet was lodged inside Williams. So the official story remains official, albeit with questions unanswered. Despite the fact he hardly sang any lead parts on the Temptations' many classic hits, Otis Williams played, and continues to play, a key role in the group as one of its founding members, its longtime leader, and its self-described glue, as he told Rolling Stone in 2018. And he kept things together in the band despite enduring his share of personal challenges, including the end of his first 2 marriages and, far more notably, the untimely death of his son, Lamont. Otis Lamont Miles, who made his living as a construction worker, was just 24 years old when he was killed in a workplace accident on August 8, 1985. Speaking to The Express in 2023, Williams shared that it was the thrill and satisfaction of performing live with the Temps that helped him through that difficult time in his life. I was grieving because I lost my son, but when I got up on stage, I realized I was bringing people happiness. So whatever sorrow I had within me, I let it transfer out into that audience, having a wonderful time and enjoying our music, he told the outlet. I've always taken negativity and turned it into positive. Best known for his falsetto vocals, which he utilized to perfection on songs such as The Way You Do the Things You Do, Get Ready, and You're My Everything, Kendricks was responsible for creating most of the group's vocal arrangements and also served as wardrobe manager, including the now famous purple suits the group wore for one performance. Though Whitfield had chief responsibility for writing, Kendricks co-wrote and received credit for several Temptation songs.
Well, I think Eddie was probably the first guy to give falsetto some real class.
In an interview with a Chicago television series called Urban Street, Kendricks said he had actually considered leaving the group as early as 1965, even though that was when the band was finally starting to take off, because of things that weren't quite proper. He explained that they were working with people that didn't have their best interests at heart. Kendricks, however, initially decided to stay in the group because he was worried he would not get the support he needed if he left. He also said that his relationship with Berry Gordy was less than cordial. Berry Gordy is a man I don't know. I only met him about 3 times, he said, but I know he didn't particularly care for me. Kendricks stated that he did not agree with many decisions that were made. Eddie Kendricks was already a shadow of his old self during the ill-fated Temptations reunion tour of 1982. At that point, his many years of heavy cigarette smoking had left him unable to reach the high notes he used to hit so effortlessly as a younger man. Nonetheless, he continued to perform live over the next several years, oftentimes with fellow ex-Temptations David Ruffin and Dennis Edwards. By the early 90s, Kendricks' health problems began to escalate, and he had one of his lungs removed, later warning young people not to smoke, as he had been doing for the past 3 decades or so. The singer was 52 years old when he passed away from lung cancer on October 5, 1992, at a hospital in his hometown of Birmingham, Alabama. As quoted by The Washington Post, the Temptations' first manager, Esther Edwards, looked back on Kendricks' legacy as 1/5 of the group's best-known lineup. Eddie just had that great tenor voice that just was so captivating, she said in a statement. He had such admirers, men and women. But the ladies really loved Eddie and his style. He just had a sweet, melodious, captivating, tender sound.
Melvin Franklin. I was impressed with Melvin when I heard him sing with a group called Voice Masters, and at the time he was 16 years old. And to hear a 16-year-old young boy with a bass sounding like an old man, I had to meet him.
Melvin's death left Otis Williams as the last surviving, following the respective deaths of David Ruffin and Eddie Kendricks. A third member of the classic Temptations lineup passed away in the 90s. Melvin Franklin, the Temps' longtime bass singer, who at that point had been with the group since its inception. Franklin was shot in the hand and leg while trying to stop a carjacking outside of a hair salon in West Hollywood. He had earlier left his vehicle running when he stopped to talk with a female friend. During the struggle, the carjacker recognized Franklin from the Temptations, pushed him out of the car, and sped off. Franklin was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, the symptoms of which he combated with cortisone so that he could continue performing. The constant use of cortisone left his immune system open to other infections and health problems. As a result, Franklin developed diabetes and later contracted necrotizing fasciitis. To treat his illnesses, Franklin took oxygen tanks with him while on tour. Melvin died on February 23, 1995, at the age of 52. His cause of death was listed as heart failure, though his condition was also exacerbated by diabetes. That left Otis Williams as the sole surviving Temptation from the group's original lineup. Toward the end of his eponymous Temptations biography, Williams looked back on the death of his best friend of more than 3 decades, offering a short but touching tribute to their many years as buddies and bandmates. I loved all the Temptations like brothers, but it was Melvin who had stood shoulder to shoulder with me through the good times and the bad, Williams wrote. After Eddie died, there were 2 surviving original members, and that meant that Melvin and I each had someone who could understand who we were and how we felt. There were many things between Melvin and me that didn't even need to be said.
Meantime, Chicago police are investigating the death of Temptations lead singer Dennis Edwards. There are allegations involving his wife.
Dennis Edwards died under mysterious circumstances. As earlier mentioned, Dennis replaced Ruffin after he was fired. Edwards later reconnected with Ruffin, in which both men participated in cocaine binging during off hours. According to Williams, Edwards was also arriving late or inebriated from late-night partying. He began missing shows and rehearsals and was replaced. He went on to have a solo career. Edwards toured and recorded with Ruffin and Kendricks, billing themselves as the former leads of the Temptations. Edwards began touring under the name Dennis Edwards and the New Temptations, prompting a legal battle between himself and Otis Williams. In November 1997, a federal judge ruled that Edwards could continue performing under their current name. Edwards' then manager felt using New was unique, different, and an attention-getter. However, Williams appealed the ruling, in which Edwards was legally barred from using the band's name, which led Edwards' group to be called the Temptations Review, featuring Dennis Edwards. However, Dennis Edwards' death in Chicago on February 1, 2018, just 2 days before what would have been his 75th birthday, was particularly notable for reasons beyond the fact he was the group's lead voice during its successful psychedelic soul era in the late 60s and early 70s. Edwards' official cause of death was complications from meningitis, but as reported by the Detroit News, an emergency protection order filed in January of that year alleged that the singer was neglected and abused by his wife, Brenda, in the months leading up to his passing. Some of the disturbing allegations from the order included claims that Brenda took away her husband's hearing aids, cell phone, and iPad, and an even more chilling accusation that she tried to suffocate him by holding his head face down on the bed. Issa Pointer Stewart, Edwards' daughter with fellow singer Ruth Pointer, also claimed she didn't hear anything about meningitis from her father's doctors. Brenda Edwards denied the accusations, issuing a statement to the Detroit News that read, "I love Dennis and we were married for 18 years. I would have never done anything to harm him. These allegations are false and defamatory and will be proven as such." Her name was cleared later in 2018 as officials found no evidence of the purported abuse.